Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're going to look at something that's really, at the heart of trust, especially when it comes to coaching, and that's confidentiality. I mean, you know how important it is for a client to feel safe, really safe to open up, right?
Absolutely.
But what happens when you bring in the digital world, the digital workplace? I mean, things get a little complicated, don't they?
Oh, yeah. It gets really tricky to keep things private.
Yeah.
When everybody's connected all the time.
Yeah.
In all these different ways. We're going to look at a real situation, a case study, actually.
Okay.
That shows exactly how tough it can be to keep things confidential in today's work world.
All right.
With all the tech we use.
So to walk us through all this, we have case study standard 3.
Right.
And it tells the story of Marcos, an internal coach at this company, XYZ Corporation.
Okay.
And he's doing really well. He's getting great results, a 10% increase in productivity. I mean, that's pretty significant, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And it sounds like he's built a strong relationship with the company too.
Yeah, he's got a good thing going. It seems like everyone trusts him, and then the HR director asks him to do something that kind of throws him off.
Uh-huh.
He's asked to forward an email from a client.
Oh.
And it wasn't just any email. This email had sensitive stuff in it, details about a problem that the client was having with a colleague. Mm-hmm. Now, this is information that the client shared with Marcos, as part of their coach, getting ready for a future coaching session.
I see. So it was shared in that, confidential space of the coaching relationship.
Exactly. Even though it ended up, in Marcos's company email inbox.
Oh, right.
So Marcos immediately feels this conflict, He's got his responsibility to his employer, but he's also got this, commitment to keep his client's information private.
Uh-huh.
And just to make things even more complicated, this all happened on the company's email platform.
That adds a whole other layer to it.
It does. So the big question we're really diving into today is, can confidentiality truly be maintained in today's tech-heavy workplaces?
Especially, in the context of internal coaching.
Exactly.
It's a big one. And it really makes you think about how coaching works, and even more broadly, how trust works in organizations.
Yeah. How do we build trust, when technology can kind of blur the lines? So what did Marcos do? Well, the first thing he did, which makes total sense if you're all about confidentiality, is he went back to his coaching agreement with the client.
Right, back to the basics.
Back to the basics.
Yeah.
So what did he find?
Well, what's interesting is that the agreement had the usual stuff, about not sharing confidential information. I mean, that's pretty standard.
Yeah.
But it missed something really important.
What's that?
It didn't say anything specific about technology.
Yeah.
What should happen if someone shares private information through the company systems like email. I mean, that's a pretty big oversight these days.
It is. It's like those standard confidentiality clauses, they're almost becoming outdated.
Yeah.
We need to be way more specific about technology now.
We do.
Yeah.
Because think about it. How often do we use email or chat or, whatever, without really thinking about the implications for confidentiality?
All the time, right.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, have you ever actually stopped to think about the specifics of digital communication, in the agreements you're a part of, whether it's work or even in your personal life?
It's a good point. It's something we probably don't think about enough.
Right.
So the case study goes on to talk about the implications for coaching. And this is where things get really interesting.
It does. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The source is very clear about this confidentiality. It's not just a nice to have. It's essential.
Right.
And to make it actually work, you need to be proactive.
Absolutely. You can't just assume that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
About what's okay to share and what's not. You need clear guidelines.
You need to spell it out, and you need to do it up front.
Right up front, before any coaching even begins.
Both the organization and the coach need to be crystal clear about what's considered confidential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this gap in Marcos's agreement,
yeah,
where it didn't mention technology, that really highlights a few key points that the source brings up under these implications for coaching.
Okay. Like what?
Well, first off, being proactive is key.
Okay.
Like I said, waiting for a situation like Marcos to happen before you figure things out is like trying to, drive without a map. It's just asking for trouble.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So the case study makes a good point here. It says that every single detail of the coaching arrangement needs to be spelled out clearly.
Oh.
And this isn't just the company's responsibility. The coach has a big role to play here too.
How so?
Well, they need to set those clear boundaries
right.
with both the organization and with the individual client.
Sure.
right from the get-go.
So it's all about managing expectations early on,
Yeah.
avoiding those gray areas that the source talks about.
Right, because when things aren't clear,
Yep.
that's when you run into problems.
Exactly. And this leads to the next point, which is that internal coaches and the organization, they should have a formal agreement
Yes, a written agreement.
that specifically addresses confidentiality in all its forms, including the use of company technology.
Right, because if you don't have that clear agreement between the coach and the organization,
Yeah.
then you're basically setting yourself up for misunderstandings and tricky situations,
Yeah.
just like what Marcos is facing.
Yeah, you're creating an environment where those problems are more likely to pop up.
Exactly. It's about putting that framework of clarity in place so everyone knows where they stand.
Okay, so let's talk about the ethical side of things here.
Yeah.
Because Marcos is in a tough spot, isn't he?
Oh, he's definitely on an ethical tightrope.
Yeah, he's got this loyalty to XYZ Corporation,
His employer.
his employer,
Yep.
right? But he also has this professional and ethical duty to his client.
Right. He's got two obligations pulling him in opposite directions.
It's a real dilemma.
It is now from the HR director's point of view.
Yeah.
The email's on the company's system, so they might think, well, it's company property.
Right.
We can access it.
Right. It's on our server.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, the client reasonably expects their communication with their coach to be private.
Of course.
I mean, they shared this information in confidence. They were planning to talk about it more, in their coaching sessions.
Right.
Just because they use their company email doesn't mean they automatically give up that expectation of privacy.
No, not at all. And it brings up this really interesting question about privacy at work. Especially in the digital age.
Yeah.
Just because something's on a company server, does that automatically mean it's no longer confidential?
Especially when it's shared, in this specific context of a professional relationship, like coaching.
Exactly.
So what can Marcos do? Well, a case study gives a few possible outcomes or next steps, and they're actually relevant to anyone who's facing a tricky ethical situation.
Okay.
The first one is to get some outside support.
Right, because you don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah, so reach out to mentors, supervisors, coaching organizations, anyone who can give you an unbiased perspective and some ethical guidance.
It's like having a sounding board.
Yeah.
Someone to help you think things through.
Exactly. It makes you think, if you were in Marcos's shoes, where would you turn for that kind of objective ethical advice?
That's a good question to ask yourself, just to be prepared.
Yeah, have those resources lined up.
The second thing Marcos could do is try to clarify things with the organization.
Okay.
And this isn't about being confrontational or anything.
Right.
It's about being proactive and addressing those unclear areas that have come up.
Okay.
So he could suggest revisiting the coaching agreement, and specifically adding clauses about technology and confidential information.
Okay.
And, another good idea is to review these agreements regularly, maybe even annually, just to make sure they're still up to date.
That's smart because technology changes. Things change. What seemed clear a year ago might not be so clear now.
Exactly. So those agreements need to keep evolving too.
And this applies to any kind of agreement, not just coaching, any kind of collaborative agreement.
Absolutely. Keep things transparent, keep things updated.
So the third key step is all about communication with the client.
Right. Keeping them in the loop.
Exactly. The case study really stresses how important it is to tell the client that their confidential information might have to be shared with the employer.
Especially when company resources are involved.
Yeah, and revisiting the client agreement is also essential just to make sure it covers all the bases.
Make sure everyone's on the same page.
Being open and honest with the client is so important here.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just the possibility of confidentiality being compromised, you've got to be upfront about it.
It's about maintaining that trust.
Exactly.
Even when things get difficult.
So the source also has some discussion points that encourage us to think about this whole situation more broadly. One of them asks, what resources can you turn to as a coach in this kind of situation? But this isn't just for coaches, right?
No, this applies to anyone, really.
It makes you think about what your go-to resources are when you're facing an ethical dilemma, at work or even in your personal life.
Who are those trusted advisors in your life?
Exactly. Do you have professional organizations you can turn to, mentors, trusted colleagues? Have those resources in mind just in case.
It's always good to be prepared.
Yeah. And the other discussion point asks, how would you support the coach if you were their coach, mentor, or supervisor? So this one shifts the focus to leadership and support roles.
Right.
How can we create environments where people feel comfortable raising these ethical concerns?
Yeah, and where they know they can get the guidance they need.
It's about building that culture of ethical awareness,
And providing the right support systems.
making sure people have the tools and resources to navigate these tricky situations.
Yeah.
The case study also mentions the ICF Code of Ethics.
The 2021?
Yeah, specifically Section 1 Standards 1, 3, and 6.
Right.
Now, we don't have to go into all the details here.
Yeah,
But it's good to know that these professional guidelines exist.
absolutely.
They provide a framework for ethical conduct in coaching.
They cover things like maintaining client privacy, acting with integrity, clearly defining the coaching agreement, all those important things.
Right. So Marcos isn't out there on his own. There are established ethical principles that can guide him.
And that can guide any coach, really.
So what's the main takeaway from all of this? I think it's the importance of having those crystal clear agreements about confidentiality.
Especially in these situations where the lines between work and personal life get blurry.
Yeah, like when you're using technology for internal coaching,
Right.
you can't just assume that the same rules of privacy apply as they would in a face-to-face setting.
Exactly. And, for you, the listener, this really highlights the fact that those general assumptions about privacy might not hold up in a corporate environment.
Especially when you're using company-owned tools for communication.
All right, it's a recipe for trouble.
It is. You could end up with some serious ethical problems, and it can really damage that trust that coaching is built on.
Yeah, trust is fragile.
It is. So, as we wrap up here, it's worth thinking about this question. How can you make sure that expectations around confidentiality are clearly defined and understood?
In all your different relationships and agreements.
Yeah, because this goes way beyond coaching.
This is about how we handle trust and privacy in a world that's increasingly digital.
Exactly. How do we navigate those boundaries in this new landscape? It's something we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive,
It's been a pleasure.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.